Hello and welcome to the Python Django crash course. In this short course, I will try and pack in all the basic concepts that will help you on your way to learning and mastering Django for rapid web development. In this short course, we will cover installations, starting and managing projects in Django. We will have a look at models, so building a database. We'll have a look at dynamic web pages or building dynamic web pages and hyperlinks. Look at the Django templating system and working with images. So we are utilizing Python here, so I'm not expecting to have any prior knowledge of Python, but inadvertently we will also cover functions, variables, and loops. So let's start off by answering, what is the Django framework? So the key point here, as I already said, was rapid development. Django is a web framework. Think of this as a collection of tools that help us developers quickly build or prototype web applications. Just take a second to think about all the websites that you go to. Most, if not all of them, have user logins. That requires some sort of database. All pages are probably generated from a database, or the data on the page is generated from a database. With Django, user management tools, data management tools, these features are all pre-packed within the Django framework, which we can then use to build our web applications. So having these tools readily available ultimately means that it will reduce the amount of time it takes for us to develop applications. So Django is written in Python, therefore we're going to need Python in the background for us to actually run the Django code. So head over to python.org, select downloads. Now if you're running Windows, you can just select download Python here. Alternatively, if you're running any other distributions, then just select your other distribution that you're working with. So for example here, Windows, I can select Windows, and then I can go down and select the Windows installer, 64-bit, download that, and let's run the installation. I won't need to take you through the whole installation. You just need to basically select next. You can see that I already have Python installed, so it asks me to upgrade now, but you just simply press next, get it installed, and then we can test to see if it's working. To test to see if Python is installed, head over to your start, press CMD to open up the command prompt. Let me just bring us across CMD, and then we can just type in Python -- version. There we go, and I've got Python 3.9 installed. So that's indicating that Python is installed. So next up, we're going to need a code editor. So we're going to be utilizing Visual Studio Code. So head over to code.visualstudio.com, just download for Windows, run the installation, start the application. So once you've started Visual Studio Code, just head over to the left-hand side panel here. You can see the extensions. Just go ahead and type in Python. We're going to install an extension which is going to give us some additional tools. So select the Python and install. That will just install and we're good to go. So that will give us a few tools that will just help us along when we're actually developing. So if we make some mistakes, it's going to let us know that we're making mistakes and there's problems in the code. So next up, we're going to build a virtual environment, which is a dedicated development space in our operating system. So think of our operating system, our computer here as a box. We're going to create a smaller box and work within that development space. So what that ultimately means is that I can have multiple virtual environments where I can have multiple versions of Django or other Python applications running. And that just allows me to manage my applications more effectively than if they were just installed on my main operating system. So now we're ready to create a virtual environment. First of all, actually, let's just create a new project folder. So maybe on my desktop, I'm just going to create a new folder. Let's call this D. Okay, so now I have this new folder. Let's go ahead now and open up the terminal. So Control and comma. I'm going to type in py for Python. I'm going to be running a package, so I use the M flag, and that's the venv package I want to run or start. So now I just need to create a folder, venv. So I'm going to call my folder venv. That's where my virtual environment files are going to be placed. So now we've made our virtual environment container, we now need to work within it. So to do that, we need to type in venv. So we'd just basically go along the folder and we're going to open up this folder. We're going to open up the scripts folder and we're going to activate it. So venv backslash, and then we need the scripts folder and then activate. So that's going to activate the virtual environment. You can see here it says venv to indicate that the virtual environment is activated, and we're now working inside of that small box. So don't forget, every time you work with your Django project, you'll need to activate your virtual environment. So now we need to install Python. So we pip install, so pip is the Python manager, install, and then Django. So pip install Django, that's going to install Django within our box, within our virtual environment. And we can now see in the library here, site packages, we have Django application. So now we can start a new Django project. Type in Django admin and then start project. And then we can give the project a name. So I'm going to call this project core. Now at this point, I also want to install this package in a folder. And I don't want to install this in a folder inside of a folder. So if I leave it like this and press enter, it's going to install or create a new folder. And inside of that folder is then going to be my project. So what I want to do is I want to make the project folder in this root directory here. So after the core, I press space and dot, full stop. And then my project will then be installed here in this folder. So now we can start our application. So let's type in py for Python, managed py, and then run server. This is going to create a simple lightweight server to run our application. You can see here, if everything goes well, our server starts at this address here. So we can follow this link over to our browser, and then it will open this page. So let's just quickly run through the folder and file structure here. We have the managed file, which allows us to interact with Django. This is the database file. So here we've created an SQL-like database by just running the server. We'll come back to that. And then we have the core folder. So inside of here, there's two files that we need to become familiar with. The settings file, where we can define parameters for our application. For example, what database we might want to use. The URLs is a file that allows us to describe what paths are available within our application. We'll be utilizing this later to build some different paths into our system. So key to any Django project is the paths. So a path is an addressable unit. This allows us to navigate throughout our application. So let's start off by building a new path. So I'm just going to get rid of some of this text here. So let's build a new path. So path, and then we need to define the path. So here we're going to have a path called home. So when we type home into the browser, that's going to take us to this page that we're building. So here we're going to utilize a tool from Django called template view. So this is a pre-existing piece of code that Django has available for us so that we can perform certain actions. And here what's going to happen is that this allows us to actually show a web page to a user, for example, a template view. So here we need to define the template that we want to show the user, the web page we want to show the user. So let's create a new template called home.html. So because we're borrowing some functions from Django, it means that we're going to need to import it into our project. So up here, what you're seeing here are imports into our project. So these are resources that we need in order to run this code. So what we need to do now is bring in this resource so we can use this resource from Django. So we do that from Django views generic, and then we import the template view. So you can now see that the underline is gone, and we now should be able to utilize this function. So when we go to the home page or the home URL here, it should take us to, or should provide us this template called home.html. So we're going to need to build this. So right click, new folder. Let's make a new folder called template. And inside of here, we're going to create a new file. We'll call that home.html, and we'll just say hello world. There we go. So that's our template. So when we go to this page, it's going to show us hello world. So this isn't going to work by default because Django doesn't know about this template folder that we've just created. So we need to tell it about it. This is where the settings comes in. Remember, the settings are the core instructions for our application. So down in the bottom here, if I go to line 57, you can see that we've got the template section. So here I can describe where my templates are going to be placed. So the base directory describes the directory of my project folder, the base directory of my folder, and then the template is described in the template folder. So I'm telling Django to look for the base directory of my project and then a folder called template to find the templates. So let's just make sure the server is running. I can press up on the keyboard to bring up the previous commands. So let's run the server again. Everything looks okay. If it wasn't, it would give us an error. So let's go back to the web page. We now need to navigate to our home/home. That's the URL that we've created. And you can now see that our web page is working. So the general design philosophy here is to build our application with smaller applications. So our application is built up of small applications. So for example, let's build a new application. So start app, and then we're going to create a blog element within our application. So I call this app blog. You can see straight away that Django provides us a new folder with a number of files. So what I want to do is associate everything about that blog app and define it within this blog area here. So one thing I want to now change across in the core URLs, this link here really refers to my app. So I want to place that within this application here. So I need to create a new file called urls.py. So I'm going to create a new URL list. I'm going to copy across the core URLs to the blog URLs and get rid of line 1 and get rid of line 5. And that just leaves me with the link to my home page. So now I've associated this link in my blog. I now need to tell Django about these URLs, that they exist. So back in your core URLs, we don't need this anymore because we defined this within our blog. So let's now make a link to our new URLs. So path, and then the link is going to be home. So we then need to include the new URLs that we've just created. So that's in the blog app and in URLs. So we've defined that. Now notice this has got the yellow squiggly line, so we need to import that. Oh, not import. We need to include that tool so that we can use the include. So this is just basically building a link to the new file that we created here in blog called URLs, and Django will now look at these. So the path here isn't going to be home. If I created this, my path would be home/ and then home. That would be the path to this template now. So I want to get rid of that and use the root directory. So now I've linked the URLs. Let's go ahead now and start the server. So if we've got that, let's run the server. So everything looks okay. So we should now be able to refresh, go to the home, and we're okay. So we can do a little bit of a sanity check here. So let's just go back to our template and then just type in something else. Just to check to see if it is actually running. So press refresh and there we go. So learning a little bit more about the folder and file structure, here we have a file called views. So this is where we this is the glue within our application. Here we're going to stick together data from the database. We're going to stick the templates together. We're going to add some logic potentially. So the views is a really important file. So when the user makes a request, first of all, Django looks for the URLs to make a match. Our URLs are connected to a view. That's generally the workflow here. So what we're going to do now is get rid of this kind of automated view, and we're going to build our own view and connect it up to a view that we're going to build. So let's just remove this and let's build a new view. So views dot, and we're going to call this view home. So we can also give it a name. So let's call this, for example, the home page. So notice here we've got the yellow line again, which is indicating a problem. So this doesn't exist yet, which is the problem. So what we need to do is we need to now build this view in our views, and we need to link it together. So let's go ahead in our views. Let's build our first view. So we're going to build a function here. So this is a Python function, and it's going to be called home. So what we need to do is take in request. So when the user builds a request or makes a request on their browser, all that information can be packaged up, and we want to potentially use some of that information to make some decisions potentially. So we include that within our function here. We pass that in. So I think of these functions here as boxes, small boxes, and we pass information in. We take information out of these boxes. So this is a Python function. So what we need to make sure here in Python that we're using 4 spaces. Okay, so in our tab, there should be 4 spaces here. So I'm just going to type in pass for now. So that's just a Python command just to kind of ignore and just to move on. So let's just make a connection first. So in our URLs, you can see we've got the yellow line. So what we're going to need to do now is build a link. So from dot. So dot is referring to this folder, and we want to import the views. So I'm basically just importing all the stuff here, or making this available inside of my URLs. So what I can then do is take this views here, that's what it's referring to, and then look for the home function. So that's what I've done. I've connected this path to the views, in the views, the home function. So now what I can now do is think about returning that template that we created. So let's go ahead and remove this path, and we're now going to return. So we're going to return a render. So a render is basically we're going to stick things together. So we're going to need the request information. We need our template, which is called we're going to call index.html. So we're going to change the name of that. And then potentially to that template, we're going to pass some data. So this render is going to stick together the data and render it inside of our template if needed. We'll see that shortly. And then we're going to send that back to the user. Okay, so that pretty much solves that little issue there. So let's go back into our template. Let's call this index. So we're just changing the name. And now what we're going to do is test this out. So what should happen now is that user types in /home. It takes us to this URL. And this URL is connected to this view. And this view is connected to this template. So just make sure the server's started. Let's go back in, let's refresh, and there we go. We have our page running. So let's talk about databases, because our page is going to need some data. So let's go into the models. So here in Django, we have a object relational mapping tool. So we can continue writing in Python, and Django is going to convert that Python into SQL, which is a language which can then be utilized to build, create, and manage databases. So we don't need to know anything about that. That's one of the great tools of Django, the ORM, in that we can just continue writing. So for example, if we want to build a table, we need to build a class. So let's build a new table in our database. We're going to call this post. And we're then going to need the tools to do that. So here we're going to bring in models. So we've already imported that in line 1. So inside of models, we have all of our model data. So we're going to need that. And then we can actually then build up a new table. So I seem to have 2 spaces, which is strange. So I'm just going to change that to 4. There we go. Okay, so now we can start describing the fields we want within this table called post. So we're probably going to need some sort of title. And we're probably going to need some sort of description or content for our blog entry. And we're probably also going to need something called a slug, which we'll talk about later, a slug field. So let's go ahead now and just build this. So what we need here is the title. This is the field name. And then we need to describe what type of data type we want to store within these fields. So let's go ahead and use model. And then we've got a number of different data types. So if you're familiar with databases, you know there's character fields and text fields, image fields, etc. So this is going to be a character field, so char field. So it means that we're going to have a string, essentially a string field, and we can define different parameters, for example, like the maximum length. So this will then restrict how many characters or letters the user can type into this field. So we can do the same thing again with the content. So the content, for example, apologies, this needs to equal. So for the content, we use a text field. And here for the slug, we use a slug field. So a slug is essentially the URL. So we want to create part of a URL that's indicating, or that can be used to indicate which post we want to show on the page. And that will come a lot clearer later on when we actually utilize the slug. So let's just include that for now. So the final component here is a dunderstring method. So this basically is telling Django, when we collect data from a database, how do you want it to look like when we return it? So we return the data and by default just show the title of that data. So we know potentially what data that is that we've returned. So that explains this dunderstring method here. So it just basically defines the default name of the data that gets returned. So now we've got that in place, it doesn't exist anywhere at the moment other than here. So what we need to do is we need to actually now apply that to our database. So the database has already been pre-created by Django when we started or run the server. So now what we need to do is take this new table and put it inside of our database. So we do that by, first of all, using make migrations. So Django has a migration tool which manages and tracks all the different changes that we built, or sorry, made on the database. So make migrations is going to make a file which records the actions that we've taken within our database, for example. So you can see that it says no changes detected. So at the moment, the problem is we created this blog application, but Django doesn't know it exists. So what we need to do here is go into core and then settings, and we need to actually register our app. So it's called blog. So that's all we need to do at this point. So let's go ahead now and make the migrations again. And notice this time it identifies that we've created a new table called post. So now we can go ahead and actually migrate it. So that just prepares the data. So now we can migrate, and now it will actually be applied to the database. There we go. So by default, we can't actually see what's inside of a database. So what we're going to need is an extension to help us. So here I have installed SQLite. So search for SQLite, and then just install that. That's going to provide us a small extension package, which is going to allow us to right click on our database here, go to open database, and then at the bottom here we can now see our database. So I can open the database and I can now see the new table that I created and all the different fields. So there isn't any data in my database at the moment. I can right click and show the table. There isn't any data. So I guess the next thing that we need to do is add some data. Another great feature of Django is the administration tool. So by default, Django comes with an administration tool that allows us to manage our data. So what we need to do is create a super user, which is a user that we can use to go into the admin panel and make changes and add data and so on. So let's create a new super user. I'm going to call mine admin, and I don't need an email, so I'd press enter, and then I type in a password, which you can't see when you type in, but it is there. So my password is short because I'm using admin, so I press Y, and now I've created a new super user. So what I can now do is start the server, and I can now go into the admin panel. Now, if you remember in the core, in the URLs, the path for the admin already existed when we created the new Django project. So what we need to do now is just go back into our server. Let's go into the path/admin, and that takes us to the admin area. So let's just log in. So by default then we see groups and users. So straight away I could delete and manage and add new users. So by default, Django isn't going to put your database or your table that you created inside the admin. We need to now register our table so that we can then add data to our table. So to do that, Django has provided in our blog a file called admin. And from here, we can register our model. So this is a two-step process. First of all, we need to actually import the models. So here I've just imported all the models and made them available in the admin page. And now I just go ahead and use the admin site register and then models. So I extend from models, and inside of models, I've got a table called post. So I've defined that. So with that now set, I can now go back into my admin refresh, and the post is now available for me to edit. So remember, if I add a new post, I've got 3 fields in my table at the moment. So I can now type in new information. So blog 1. So remember, a slug is an addressable unit, so it can't have any spaces. So we use a hyphen or underscore. So there we go. That's my first piece of information. So go ahead, create a few posts. So I've created data for 2 posts. So let's go back into our application now, because what we want to do is show that information on our web page. So let's remember that data is in a database. So let's go to our views. So what we now need to do, remember the view sticks everything together. So our template, our data, any logic that we want to create. So we need to now grab the data from the database. So we're going to need the database. So from .models, we want to import the post table. So now what we want to do is run a query. We want to grab the data from the database. So let's grab the data and put it into a new variable called data. So the table that we want to get data from. Now we've got a default object manager. So think of the objects as basically a way of communicating with the database. So I communicate with the database through objects. So that's that function. So what do I want to collect from the database? So now I need to define in this third section what I want to collect. And I want to collect all the data. So I describe this. If you're familiar to SQL, this is basically running a select all from post table. Okay, so now I have all the data from my database. That's the post data I just created in the admin area. I'm now storing it inside of data. So what I now need to do is pass it through to the template. So I need to do that by setting up a kind of a context point. So when I send the data across to the template, I need a name to refer that data to. So it's going to be called posts. And then I define the data I want to send across, or to put in this variable. Essentially, our data is inside of this variable here. And now what I'm doing is I'm putting this data inside of this variable and passing it across to my index page, my template, so I can then output it onto the template. So let's now go into templates and our index file. Now then, I want to output the data. So let's just make a simple tag for this. So what we're going to need to do here is run a loop, because I might have more than one item in the database. So I want to collect that data, those multiple datas, and then I want to output them to the page. So I need to run a loop. So here I'm going to run a for loop. So what I'm saying here is that basically for anything I find in the database, I want to loop through it. So for every item I loop through, I want to refer to that in a particular way. And I'm going to refer to that as post. So the second parameter here is going to be the data I want to loop through, which is posts. Remember, we've sent across the data from the view in posts. So for every item in posts, I'm going to loop through it. And for every item, I can extract information from it utilizing posts here. So let's put the P's inside. This is my loop. So what I can now do is use the doubles here to extract information. So the data's inside the post variable. What data do I want to collect? Well, that depends on your model. I've got 3 data points here, fields, so I can collect any of this data and output it. So let's do the title first. And then I can do the same thing again and copy and paste that. And I can now output the content as well. So let's go ahead now and back into my website. Let's open up a new link. And then you can see I've got 2 paths available, one of them being home. And there we go. So I now have outputted the data from the database. So I want this page to be my home page. So let's just close all this up. Right, so if you remember in the core in the URLs, we defined home, but I want it to be the home page. So I'm going to remove that. And now we're going to use the root directory of our website. So by doing that, and then now just removing home, I now have as the root or the home page, the website or the template that I've created. So now this is the home page for my website. So to aid this rapid development of my website, I can utilize tools such as Bootstrap, which is going to provide me pre-existing components so I can create a user interface very quickly. So let's go over to the docs if you're not familiar here, and then just go down to inside of introduction to the starter template. And I'm going to copy that template and then just go back into my application. Let's just drop this down. And I'm going to go into my index template and I'm just going to override that for now. Or I can press Control and / to comment it out, even better. So I'm just going to paste what I just copied from Bootstrap across. I'm just going to get rid of all these comments. Don't need them just for now. And let's have a look to see what that looks like now on our page. So this just creates the boilerplate for our page. Now, if you're familiar or not familiar with Bootstrap, it comes with a CSS and JavaScript file, which essentially has all the styling for the page and all the functionality that we might want to create utilizing the existing Bootstrap components. So we now have our home page. So what we can now do is go back into Bootstrap And now think about utilizing some of the other tools it has. So in the examples, what we're going to do here is utilize this example here, this album. So I can go into this album, we're going to build this page. So now what I can do is right click and view the page source. So what I want to do here, just very quickly, is from the body, so from the header, sorry, I want to copy all this down all the way down to the footer. So because we're using Bootstrap, that's kind of the leveler here. It means that this code will just work on our page. So I'm going to copy that, and I'm going to copy that across to our page, get rid of the hello world here, and then, too many. Inside the body, make sure you keep the script. I'm just going to paste that in, and now I'm going to go back to my web page and have a look. There we go. So I've just copied that across. So next up, I want to basically put my data, my post information inside of these boxes here. So let's go back into Bootstrap. This is going to take a little bit of looking at, but essentially all those items you see on the page are columns. So you can see coal, those are the individual components or the cards that you saw on the page. So I just basically need to remove them all apart from one. So from my line 74, where it starts coal, I'm just going to drag down all the different columns until I get to this last one, because that's a little bit more confusing, and then I delete. So that leaves me with one column, and I can save and then go back and refresh, and I should be left with one item. So that one item I want to copy out multiple times, depending on how many items I have in the database. And I want to then add my own information inside of here. So let's break this up. So I'm going to follow this line here, so to see where this div ends. So just to make sure I've got my individual component. What I'm going to do now is going to take my loop that I created earlier. Let's just bring this in. And I'm basically just going to loop out. So let's go down to the section here. I'm going to basically loop out a box or this card every time there's an item in the database. So let's just get rid of the comments. And I'm just going to end the loop after my card, after the column. And then I'm basically just going to remove these items here, and I'm going to add them in to where they should be on the page. So here, for example, is the text. This is going to be a little bit confusing, apologies. So just get rid of these P's. So the content will go into this content section here. And I'm going to just create a new P tag in actual fact. And inside of here, I'm just going to put in the title up top here. So post.title. There we go. Right, so that's where my data is going to reside. So just make sure that you've got the right code there. Okay, so with that in place, we're going to loop this as many times as there is items in the database, which should be 2 in my case. So I'll refresh. You can now see I've got 2 items. Now I've got a little bit of a code error here. So let's just go back into my code. You can see that there's an arrow somewhere out of place because I don't have an NP. Okay, so I've got 2 paragraphs here. Okay, so have a look in the code repository if that isn't clear. But there we go. So we've got these 2 items here, first post and second post. So there still looks like there's some sort of angle bracket right there, which seems to be out of place. So that's what we ended up with. Right, so now, as you might imagine, we're going to need an image. So we want to store images in a folder, but we want to link to them from our database. So we don't store the images in our database, but we store a link to them. So we're going to create this link here. So here we have a new field called image, and then we're going to use an image field, which is going to store the link to the image. So we define in Django where we're going to store images, and then also if we want to use a default image, in case we don't have an image that we're going to upload, we're going to create a default image too. So that's the field created. So let's just go into our project. We're going to need to make a new folder here, and we're going to call this media. And inside of media, we're going to create a new folder called images. So that's the path here, upload to images. So that's where our images are going to be uploaded to. But what we're going to do is we're going to create a default image called default.png. So let's just quickly open up Paint of all things. And I'm just going to zoom out using Control. I'm just going to scale this down slightly, and I'm just going to fill this in. So pick a color, any color, and I'm just going to save this. So this is on my desktop, in my project, in my media, in my images. So I'm going to call this default. I appreciate you can't see that. So I'm going to call this default.png. So that was in my folder, in my project folder, in the media folder, and now in images. So I've saved that up, press save. So I now have a new file inside media images default. There we go. So that's the default image all now matched up. So now we can go ahead. Remember, we've made changes to our database. So we're going to need to do that. But what you'll notice is that Django is asking us to install Pillow. So Pillow is a package that's going to help us manage images within our Django application. So let's just go ahead and pip install Pillow. There we go. So Pillow is now installed in our application. So now we can go ahead and see if we've got it here. We can make migrations. So that will then prepare this new change. So you can see that we're going to add a field to the image post. We can then go ahead and migrate. Okay. And now what we can actually do is run the server. So because we added the default, it means that every post should have that default. So let's go ahead now and actually go into our templates. Let's go into where we ended up with. So this is where we're going to loop out all items on the page. So what we can now do is remove this SVG file here, and we can add our own image. So we do that by utilizing the image tag src equals. That's the link to the image. So now we just need to link to our image. So where is this image? Well, remember, we can just grab it from the database. So post, and then the image is called, or the field is called image, and then we need to add the URL to create the actual link. So with that in place, let's go and have a look now. You notice that it doesn't actually work yet. So the final step here is we need to tell Django about this media folder that we created. It doesn't know anything about the media folder yet, so we need to set that up. So just for development only, let's go into core and our URLs. So we need to make a path to that folder so that we can utilize a path to get to those images on our web page. So what we're going to need to do is bring in two tools here to create and to link to our media folder. So I've created, I've imported these two items here, settings and static. So setting, because we want to create a new element in a minute, or a new variable in our settings. So what we're going to do here is create an if statement down here. So I pre-created this. So this is creating a URL pattern. So this is going to create a new URL pattern, put it inside of here, for example, for the media URL. So there's two settings, one called media URL and one called media root. So the media URL is utilized by the browser to find the images. The media root is used by Django to, for example, save the files in the correct folder. So these are two settings that we set up for us to manage and to be able to upload images and put them inside of that media and images folder. So now we've got that in place, what we're going to need to do is go over to our core settings. We're going to need to create our two new variables, or define them. So to do that, we need to set up our media URL and our media root. So this is going to be used for our website. This will then be a path that was utilized by Django, so it can find the folder and put the images in the right place. Right, so with that in place, let's just go back to our home page, and you can now see that our images are being displayed or served. So the good thing about obviously utilizing Bootstrap is it just automatically does everything else for us. So we now have a very responsive website, which is going to be responsive for mobile and other screen resolutions. So now we want to build a dynamic link so that we can click on these items and it takes us to an individual page to display this information about these individual posts. We only want to build one page, but we want to make it dynamic so that it would take us to the same page but show different information based upon what we've clicked on. So let's start by building a new URL, a new path to access a new page. So in the blog, the URLs, let's just copy this across. This is great usability. Here, so we're going to make a new path. So let's make a new link to that path called single. That's going to be for the single view. And then we're going to make a new view. We're going to call that single. And then we're going to give this a name of single. There we go. So that builds our new path. So now we have an entry point and now we need to connect it to our view. So let's create a new view. And we're just going to copy this and we're going to call this single. Simple as that. And now we need to ask ourselves, what data do we want from the database? Well, that all depends on what we click on, right? So how do we know what we've clicked on? How do we know what data to select? Well, let's go back to our model, because what we did here, we created a slug. And that was a unique name that we can utilize to access individual posts. So each slug will be different for each and every individual post. So we can extract that, utilize that, in order to make that query and extract that one item from the database. Now, how we do that is take this, for example. We're going to be typing in single slash and then, for example, post one. So this data here is data we want to collect from the browser, and we want to pass that across to our query so we can run a query against this slug name and then produce that one individual post from the database. So we need to collect that. So what we need to do is define in our URLs that we want to collect that. So we want to collect a slug. That's the type of data we want to collect. And then we need to store it in a variable, which we're going to call slug in this case. So you can change this variable name to as you like. If there's other data you want to collect, maybe you want to collect a number, an integer. Maybe you want to collect a string, collect a string. So here's a slug type. So we're going to collect that data from the URL and we're going to pass it across to our view. So let's go into our view. Now remember, this is a box, so we're going to need to put the data in the box. So let's put the data in the box, make it available. So now we have slug. So now we can change our query from all and just get one item. What item do we want to get? Well, where the field name equals the data that we're passing across. So this is the data we're passing in from the URL. So we want to match the slug field from an individual post with the slug data that's typed in the browser. And that's it, really. I say that's really, but we'll now go and create a new template called single, and we pass the data across again, and this time I'm going to call it post because it's going to be one individual item rather than multiple items. So that's how we're going to set up the single page. Right, so now what we can do is go into our templates. Let's create a new file. We're going to call that single.html to match up with our view. And what we can now do is we'll just print something out. So it was called post this time, .title. So let's just take a look to see if this works. So you may need to remember the slug. So my slug is called second post or first post or whatever. So I'll just copy that slug. We're going to need to do this manually. So single/second post. And you can see I'm getting the data for the single post. Now, my first post, I think I called first post the slug. Nope, I didn't. Oh, I might have made a typo there. There we go. There's my first post. So that's how I'm going to collect individual items from a database. Okay, so now we need a link because we're not going to type that in manually, of course. We want to create a link to those pages. So how do we build links? Well, we can use the slug again to build links. So let's just close all this down. Let's just start from fresh. So what we're going to need to do is build links automatically. So inside of our blog and models, what we can do here is create a function, and we're going to use a tool called reverse, which is going to construct a URL for us based upon the information that we provide it. So if we say that we want post 1, it's going to construct a URL specifically for that individual post. So I'll just paste this in and I'll explain it. So here you can see we've got a new function here called getAbsoluteURL. That's just the name of it. That's how we can identify and call this function. So we're taking self. So that's just basically a way of again, the box idea of getting information in and utilizing information outside of this box. So we just refer to self. Then we return. So what we're going to do is we're going to build a reverse. So here our website app is called app. So we need to go into the app and then we need to find the URL that we're going to build, which is called single. So what we're doing here, we're going into, our app, it's called blog. So we want to reverse blog single. So this is a reference point to the URL. So blog, and then inside the blog we have URLs. Inside of the URLs we have the name single. So we're making a link to this path here, right? So it's then going to create this link here. It's going to use the information from there. And then what we need to do is we need to get this and make it dynamic. So here you can see that the arguments that we pass in is self.slug. So when we request anything from the database here, and we run, every time we run this, what we're doing is we're going to get the URL for a very specific post based upon the slug that's matching the slug in the post in the database. So we're going to get the individual item from the database using this reverse. So you can see that this reverse is a tool that we're going to need to import in because we've got the yellow squiggly lines. So let's just import that in. So this is building, like I said, a URL. Now the thing is here, we're asking to have a look at the blog and then the single, but we need a reference point. We need a way of being able to do that. So what we're going to need to do inside of our core URLs, we're going to need to make something called a namespace. So let's create a namespace equals, and then we're going to call this blog. So that basically allowed me to kind of utilize these names like you saw in the reverse. So I can refer to it as blog. So basically I'm saying, look for the blog URLs. And that's the name I provided. So I'm matching this name. And now Django knows to look at these URLs. So what I need to do now in the URLs here, it will tell you that there's an error here. I need to use the app name. I need to actually define the app name. So app name equals blog. So that just matches those two elements together. And now I can go back into my models and I can now call it from blog, and then it finds the blog URLs. And now I say find the single URL, and it obviously now finds this. And now what we do is we grab this URL and we stitch this together. So we need the slug argument, and that's the individual item that we're trying to collect. And that builds the URL. Okay, so now we have the URL, we can now call it from the template. So let's just close it down. So let's go back into our template. Let's go to the index. And now what we want to do is we want to build a link. So you can see we've got this button here to the view. So let's just turn this into a link button. So I'm going to change this into A tags. So I am going to need to build a link. So I'm going to need the link address. So this is what we're going to use. So we're going to get the post, and then we're going to run that function, the get absolute URL function. So that's going to do that there. Right, so I'm going to just change over some of the different classes here. So I'm going to use different classes. So button primary, button SM, small. So that's just some bootstrap classes. Now I also need to change the role of this to button. So let's just change the role to button. There we go. So those are the three parameters. Right, so now we've got that in place. Let's go back and test this out. So what we've got here does not exist. Post matching query. Okay, that's fine. It's on the wrong page. Okay, so now what we have is a button here called view. So you can see at the bottom here, it's going to take me to those pages. So I press view, and there we go. We've gone to that post, and now we're at that post. So now we've created a dynamic link in our system. So in less than an hour, I've already built a website with links, with single pages. I have a database, I have data in my database, I have dynamic links, and it's looking okay. So the next thing I want to do now is have a look at templating in Django. So we always want to make sure that we reuse the code as much as possible and we don't duplicate any code. So the problem here is that I've got two pages now and they both need the HTML template. So how do I get over that? So with Django, we have a templating system where we're able to kind of inherit other items. So let me just kind of show you that. So let's create a new file here called base.html. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to get the index file, and I'm just going to remove everything down to the main here. So I'm going to grab that to main, put that into base, and then I'm going to do the opposite thing down the bottom here. So from the bottom all the way up to main. So all I've got inside of my index page is the main section, and then everything else now is in the base. Okay, so this is my base file that every page will run from. So that would include all this code here that you see. So what I need to do now is I basically need to make a link to my base file from every other page. So what I need to do here is I need to make a block. Okay, so this is a block. So this is an element on the page which I can then put other code into. So I'm going to call this block content. That's all I need to do. So what I'm going to do now is in my index pages, I'm just basically going to import this base in, and then I'm going to inject this code here inside the main, inside of that content block. So what I need to do again is I need to create a new block. I'm going to call that content. And I just need to wrap this block up. So finish it off at the bottom here. I think I've accidentally deleted the main section. It's okay. Okay, so now this block is now wrapped up nicely. So now I need to inject this code into this area here to make up my whole page. Right, so to do that, what I need to do is use the Django templating system extends, and I basically just tell it to extend from base.html. So I'm basically just going to bring in this code here, and then I'm going to overwrite the content section in base with the content section here. So let's just see that in action. There we go. So it doesn't really have much effect there because it's just the same, right? But now let's apply this to the single page. So all I need to do here in the single page now is I just need to put the extension, and then I just need to make a new block called contents. And I need to put my data inside of those blocks. And then I can now run the page. So let's go ahead and run the page. And you can now see I've got the same style as the other pages here. So that kind of really helps out here. And it allows me to then style the pages consistently over multiple pages. And of course, if I want to make any changes to my header, I only need to do that once because it's all here in the base file. So I was just wondering why it wasn't working because I've called it contents, not content. Apologies. So let's just go back in and just double check that. There we go. So we've got all the information on that page. So it's just a case now of styling this page, this single page. So I've gone ahead and created a simple style for this page. So we can take a quick look. There we go. So that's what I've just created. So let's now think about, for example, creating other pages. So here we just need to remember the workflow. Okay, so we need to remember we have our application. Inside of our application, we have URLs. So let's just build a new URL. So let's just create, for example, about us. So we can do the same thing as we did with the single. So we call views.aboutus and then name single. Oh, about us, sorry. Okay, then in views. So let's just build a new view. So we're not going to need any data here in this about us page. So all we're going to need here is our template. So let's just call this about us. And then we call the actual template about us too. And then we don't need any data. So we're not going to pass any data across maybe here. We'll just make a static page. And okay, so we now have that. So let's go into our templates. Let's create a new file called aboutus.html. There we go. And now we can just put some data about. Oh, what we can now do, of course, is bring in our base. So extend from the base and bring in a block. So let's just do this. There we go. So we can now have the About Us page. So we now built that template. Okay, so let's just give this a go. So we've got our URL, we've got our view. Let's not forget the trailing slash there. So let's go back into our template and let's go to About Us. And there we go. So we have an About Us page. So you can clearly see now how to build pages. Now, it might be that you want to build a new table at this point for the About Us information. That might be something that you might want to do. So, of course, what you'll want to do now is to link all these pages together. So this template here doesn't provide that necessarily. So what we're going to need to do here is maybe just swap over. So back over to our Bootstrap, so get bootstrap.com, go to your examples. Let's just grab another example. Let's just grab this example here. So we're going to take this example here, and we're going to view this page source. And what we're going to do is the header is labeled header, which is handy. So we're going to grab this header here, and then we're going to go over to our own base file. So I'll just close all those. So our base file, remember, has our header. So let's go into the header here. Let's drop this down. So it's quite a big header, this one. So I'm just going to remove this header, and I'm going to put in the new header. And then what we can then do is just go back to our page and then look at our new header. There we go. So now we can then turn these into links. So let's go ahead and do that. So we're just going to do this manually for the time being. So let's just grab, for example, a URL. So that's going to be, for example, http://localhost. Yeah, it's not localhost. It's 127.0.0.1, and then :8000, and then it was about us. So the features, it's called features. Let's just change that to about us. There we go. So now we have a link to the About Us page. So if you're wondering why I was doing that manually, it's because I was trying to trick you. So obviously we should do this dynamically. So we can do that by typing in here, in this case, URL, and then associate that to a URL. So here we want to go into the blog application and then the About Us link. So remember, we've named this in the URLs, About Us, so we can just capture that link automatically. So now when we go into our application, refresh, we now have the About Us link. So there we have it. In less than 1 hour, we've installed Python and Django. We've created a new virtual environment. We've started our project. We've built a model. We've learned how to build a database table. We've then created dynamic pages that are linked together in a dynamic way, utilizing dynamic hyperlinks. We've also utilized the Django templating system, and we've worked with images to display images on the page. Now, if you went into the admin area, you could also upload new images for those individual blog posts as well. And then through that, we've also learned about functions, because that's what we've been using. We've built a class, in actual fact. We've been doing object-oriented Python. We've created variables, and we've created loops to loop out information from the database. So there's a whole lot there in less than 1 hour. So I do hope you've enjoyed this quick Python Django crash course, and hopefully you feel confident now of quickly kind of prototyping or building out a website utilizing Django and the Django templating tools. So just finally, I'll thank you for listening. Hopefully that was valuable or useful for you. I do wish you all the best with Django. If you've got any other comments or queries or questions, then please leave them in the channel, and hopefully I'll see you in another tutorial.